everybody. Raul here for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the extraordinary honor and pleasure of chatting with the one, the only, Tony Franklin, the Fretless Monster.
Hi, Raul. Hi, everybody. What an introduction.
Thank you. We're so thrilled to have a chance to chat. Tony, there's so much we can talk about, but as always, we like to get to know a little bit about how you got your beginning. How did you get started in music and on bass?
Well, from the very beginning, I was born into a musical family. My parents were actually playing a gig the night before I was born. My mum on the saxophone in a British pub called the Rising Sun. And so it was just from the very beginning, music was all around me. Grandparents, parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, everybody played. So I was playing, I could read music from 7 years old. I was playing gigs with my parents' band from 5 years old. It was just an ongoing, pleasurable life experience. It wasn't something that, like, oh, it was a chore. I had to practice and do all that. It was just a way of life, which was wonderful. And so when my parents were working, gigs that weren't appropriate for me, I'd be at my grandparents' place. We'd play classical music and read charts or show tunes. Oh, it was just wonderful. Music was a real joy for me. And then the bass came along when I'd be 11 years old. My parents were doing a rehearsal. I wasn't in on the rehearsal, so I was, being an only child, making a nuisance of myself. I wanted to be in on the rehearsal. But my mother pulled out this electric bass that I can't remember seeing before and said, here, try this. She showed me where to place my hands and the names of the strings and all that. And it was just like, wow, it was that moment that just like everything clicked, everything I had learned before that. Because I played multiple instruments, the piano, drums, clarinet, various percussion and different things. So being able to read and all that definitely helped. 3 days later, I was playing gigs on the bass.
Oh, wow.
It was that quick. The fretless bass came along because that was a fretted bass, the original one. Now, after playing fretted bass and thinking I'm doing pretty well for myself, at 17 years old, I was exposed to Jaco Pastorius for the first time. And that moment was that wow, I didn't know a bass could have that presence, that kind of sound, that voice. I need to have a fretless bass. And I only wanted a precision bass. It was like my dad from a very young age said, if you want to have a real bass, you have a Fender bass, a Fender precision bass. We got one from the local paper in Derby, England. And so I just loved everything about the precision bass. Now, this was 1979, and wow. the unlined fretless precision bass was essentially being phased out by Fender because ironically, once Jaco had come along, everybody wanted the lined jazz bass. We managed to find some in the Bass Center in London, in the paper again, and we went down on the train with my parents, and I picked out one of these precision. In fact, it's this one right here. Still have it.
Wow.
I can't see. Here we go. See if I can get a bit more of that in, but.
Very cool.
And, of course, I added the pickup because I realized that I wasn't getting that same sound that Jaco got and how the harmonics jumped out. So I was like, I needed an extra pickup like Jaco did. And so I put one in myself, and 1983 in the back garden of my parents' place, got a DiMarzio pickup because I figured they were loud because Kiss used them. And so that was all I knew. And I had a hammer and chisel and a soldering iron and a drill and figured it out. And I had a Strat 3-way switch, put that in because I didn't want to change the master volume, master tone. I love that configuration. And lo and behold, a minor miracle, it worked. And so that was it. I did the same in my fretted bass. I play a lot of fretted bass too. I still have that as my main fretted. It has the other jazz, the DiMarzio pickup in there. It's still the same ones. I mean, I haven't changed it. Later, many years later, of course, that became the foundation for the signature model that Fender put out.
Absolutely.
We modeled it exactly after that bass. The only difference was that I wanted an ebony fingerboard on there for the durability. So I always use round wound strings on the fretless bass. The rosewood was getting chewed up with it. Loved the sound. This one, it still has the original fingerboard. But that was it. That was how it all began, and however many years later, I'm still loving it. And the fretless evolved though, because for me, I use it in rock music, and which I didn't know it wasn't really a thing. I just loved playing rock music and wanted to play fretless bass. So I started just, I guess, including it as much as possible. And then it became my voice, of course, with the firm and then various situations. And I just love everything about it.
Very nice. Well, and kind of going back to your education and preparation, it sounded like you knew so much about music even before you started on bass. Did you pursue any additional studies?
On the bass? No, not really. I just kind of figured it out. I mean, I do my own study, really. I mean, some of those lessons were hard learned.
Sure.
Because on the fretless bass, when you're playing by yourself at home, especially back then, there's no internet and no like backing tracks to play along with, unless you play with other musicians. You think you're doing pretty well when you're just playing by yourself. My tuning sounds good. It sounds good. I took it out with the band for the first time, and it's like, whoa, it was way, way off. So nowadays, in fact, I have an instructional course with TrueFire, and I go through exercises, but I also include very deliberately backing tracks to play along with. So it's not just straight ahead exercises. They have a musical backing. Sure. So that you have that tuning reference, because that slowed me down a couple of years. It's like, wow, I thought I was doing okay, but I'm actually not doing okay because I'm way out of tune. So to have that is a big leg up if you can do it with some kind of tuning reference these days. So, but then, my main influences back then were Jaco and John Deacon from Queen. I loved Queen. And although I didn't really study his bass lines, I was aware of them. I just loved the band.
Sure.
And I loved their songs, of course. It was always about the songs for me. But fast forward to the 2000s, early 2000s, I was exposed. Of course, I was exposed before, but I was deeply exposed to James Jamerson. Now, we all know of Standing in the Shadows of Motown, the wonderful movie and DVD that came out. But little known is there is a deluxe CD set that came from that. It's a 2 CD set, and on CD 1 are the versions that they recorded for the DVD with Joan Osborne, all the different performers with the surviving Funk Brothers. The disc 2 are instrumental remixes of the original masters without vocals, and what they do is highlight different instruments. It's not all about Jameson, it's not all about the bass, it's about and it's a wonderful highlight of what all the instruments are doing. And of course, Jameson is a huge focus, and so there are sections where it strips it down to just bass, but then also maybe with the percussion or the tambourine, so it really highlights, because there's a lot of standalone versions of Jameson's tracks on the internet, right? You can hear his bass by itself. Very, very cool, of course, to hear the sound and everything. But what is missing, and this is the essence of bass, is how it's placed in the context of a song. Those standalone versions are wonderful, but you don't really get the syncopation and the groove of how it's interacting with the other instruments.
Sure.
Especially, just bass and drums of Jameson and the 3 drummers that they use. That was actually life-changing for me. All those years later, after been playing bass for what I don't know how long it was at that point, at least 25 years, it could have been 30 years. And then the light bulb went off with that. It was quite emotional, actually, to dig into that. So I don't even know if it's still available, that CD, because it wasn't widely known. But it's worth checking out now. That changed my life. And then my whole approach of playing and playing to the song like he did while being adventurous. So, I'm not a big studier. I don't listen to a bunch of players because, I don't want to be too influenced. I like to maintain my own thing. I don't listen to too much music anymore. What I do, if I'm going to listen to anything, is listen to classical music. I love Queen. I love early to mid 70s Stevie Wonder.
Sure.
And of course, his bass lines, I listened to that very early on. His keyboard bass lines are masterpieces in themselves. And so, that's really, really about it. I prefer to keep my, shall we say, my creative imagination untarnished or uninfluenced, so that I can be very pure with that. And I've always kind of been that way and approached things my own way, for better, for worse.
It is very interesting because you have a discography. You've played with a ton of people, more than we could mention with the time that we have to chat together. But sure, you're very unique in being a fretless player in the rock world, because Jaco, being where he was with jazz and that whole kind of branch, how did you, as you walked into the rock scene, and A, you play with fretless, and B, you also play with a pick, which I'm sure throws a lot of people off with the whole fretless thing, because they're like, what? I'm confused. How was that received when you were showing up to play?
Very well. I mean, here's the thing. There have been situations that I've walked into later on, never with the firm. I mean, crazy thing is, it's a whole story unto itself, but very briefly, I connected with Jimmy Page. We did a bunch of things together with Roy Harper. So we had a vibe together. It was never about him being this legendary guy, this iconic guy. To be honest, I didn't know too much about Led Zeppelin at that point, because I was put off by them at a young age. And so I didn't pursue it. I didn't know the catalog. If you'd asked me who John Paul Jones was, I would have been clueless. I love the catalog now, and of course I've toured with Jason Bonham and done a full Zeppelin show since then with him. But back then I was pretty green to it all. And so anyway, I'd done these things. He and I had worked well together with Roy Harper. He asked me if I wanted to sit in on the rehearsals of his new project, which he was doing with Paul Rodgers and Chris Slade. And so I said, yeah, I would love to. I wasn't asked to be in the band because Jimmy knew me, but the other guys didn't. And so it was, there are important things about being in a band, and one of them is, of course, the playing, which I consider 50%. But the rest of it is the hang, the professionalism, the showing up on time, being reliable, and just having that chemistry and the vibe. So the other 50% is actually, to me, more important than the playing. And that might sound alarming to say that, but people would rather have somebody, I would rather have somebody who's maybe not the top-notch player, but they're great to be around. Somebody that you can count on, somebody that's reliable, somebody that gets it and wants to be there and does what's right for the music and is prepared and works hard and is cool, And so they probably, here was me, I was 22 years old hanging with those guys. I'm sure they wanted to see how I did and how I handled it and what I was like to be around. And so it was an extended play. I mean, they were doing the stuff for the new album. But the thing is, the only bass I took with me, because I'd heard that Pino Palladino had been sitting in with them. He couldn't do it. He had obligation with Paul Young and all sorts. He's such a busy guy. The only thing I knew about Pino at that point was I only knew him as a fretless player. Oh. Because in England, he played on a bunch of songs. I knew it was him, his Haircut 100, Paul Young, of course, a lot of iconic songs, and it was all on fretless at that point. So in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, Pino did it, and that means they must like the fretless. That was my logic. And so the only bass, I didn't even take a fretted bass. I took the 4-string fretless, which Jimmy had seen me playing and all that. And so it's like he was familiar with it. Nothing had been said. It's like, so if nothing bad had been said, you just keep going, right? And sometimes you don't always get a positive confirmation. You just read it and say, I haven't had anything negative said, so I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And that was pretty much what happened with the firm. We just kept going. Nothing was really said. I mean, the vibe was good. We were hanging and everybody was getting along. In fact, it was, dare I say, it was almost easy. It felt very easy, the way we connected. And because it wasn't any of this pretentious, there was no egos. We just wanted to make good music. Mm-hmm. And that was why I was there. And so that was the whole thing with the firm, was just let's make good music. So I stayed on the fretless, and that was it. And eventually they asked me to join the band, and before we know it, recording the first album, and everything was pretty much first or second take because we were so well rehearsed at that point. It just all flowed very naturally and easily. And they allowed me a lot of freedom. I was doing background vocals, I was playing keyboards, I was hands on the mixing desk because that was all tape and, no automation, so we needed all hands on desk. And they were very welcome to my ideas. I suppose not knowing too much about Zeppelin put me in a good place because I wasn't thinking, well, what would John Paul Jones do? What would Jimmy do in this situation? I was just approaching it with very fresh ears and approach, and they welcomed that. So kudos to them for, just seeing beyond my youth and also allowing me to bring ideas. In fact, on the second album, I remember Jimmy saying, yeah, any little ideas, put them in because it all has little interesting things, ear candy. And so he was like, they were very open to that. So, I mean, and at the time, it just felt very natural. I didn't think about it, but looking back, I'm like, wow, here was me, that young age, that happened with those guys. How did that happen? It's amazing. I appreciate it even more these days than I fully did or comprehended then.
Sure.
And so, it was quite amazing. Blue Murder, it was the same thing. I was kind of established a bit more as a fretless player then, so I took my fretless bass, and that's all I took, and it fit right in, and everything I did was on the fretless bass on that. And so it's never really been discussed. I mean, there are times when situations live or recording, they say, myself, this needs a fretted bass. And sometimes, especially live, it's about a show that has a visual aspect as well, or a lot of changes. And so it makes sense to do it on the fretted bass. I can do it all on the fretless, but, it's the fretless, you have to have there is a visual side to it. You have to look at the fingerboard. There are the guide dots. Of course there are. It's not all by ear. But, you know that, right? You've got the side guide dots. You can see those maybe.
Yes.
Yeah, for those who may not, there are the guide dots which are on the fret. It's not in between like a regular bass. So you're playing on. It's all mathematical. But you still have to have that visual aspect of it. So some shows it's just appropriate for the fretted. And I probably do, well, it varies. Anywhere between 10 to 15% of it is fretted when it's more of a fretless year. But sometimes it'll be 50-50 where I was out touring with John Fogerty last year. And that was all on fretted bass. It was appropriate, it fit. And I've done tours in Japan, long tours where it's all on fretted. So, it's whatever the music needs. It's always about the music for me. But I've been very fortunate to be able to do a lot of it on fretless because that's where I feel truly free, and that is my voice. So the journey continues.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as we fast forward, you were involved with a project of Carmine Apice's, the Guitar Zeus record.
Yeah, Carmine Appice's Guitar Zeus. Yeah, absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about that. That brought in a bunch of people, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that was a fantastic project. I think we recorded that back in 95 and 96. We were coming up on the 25th anniversary of it, and it's having a re-release, a box set. I mean, Carmine and I, of course, we did a lot of work together in Blue Murder. And from day one, second one, we had this instant chemistry. It was just right from the get-go. It was magic together every time we played. And so we were still in that zone. And Carmine wanted to put this album together with he and I, and Kelly Keeling being the basic band, but then bring in a whole bunch of iconic guitar gods, guitar Zeuses, if you said, so to speak. And so Kelly Keeling is this creative madman, shall we speak. He has so many ideas. So he and Carmine, they did the bulk of the writing because Kelly had all these ideas, but Carmine was the one that pulled it all together. I contributed some writing too, even some of the stuff in the studio, and some of the songs are purely mine, but there's a lot of collaboration and stuff. And then, it was 95, 96, so there's definitely a classic influence. There's that Blue Murder sound to it because it's Carmine and I. But there's also the kind of modern grunge sound going on, the Soundgarden influences, and a lot of different influences that are going on there. And it was all recorded analog. It sounds magnificent, and it didn't really get a full release in the States. So mostly Japan and outside of America. So it's like we remixed a couple of tracks that weren't released on the original one and added those. One of them is my song called Mystified, which you can certainly find that on YouTube out there, with Tommy Thayer on guitar. But I mean, the who's who of guitarists on this, it's Brian May, The Slash, Ted Nugent, Yngwie's on there, and Steve Morse. It just goes on, and everyone has their own song. But it's fantastic stuff. It's some of the best stuff that Carmine and I have done together, including Blue Murder.
Wow.
So this stuff, it has a real vibe to it. So we're very excited it's coming out. And it still sounds fresh. I mean, it still sounds really modern and fresh and timeless. So it was just time for it.
There's a side of you, and you're an extraordinarily busy player, but you're also dedicating time to education as well. And as you'd mentioned, you've got some instructional tips with Fretless, particularly. And again, as I see your YouTube channel, there's a lot of things for Fretless players there.
Yeah. Well, I love it. I'm not much of a one-on-one student teacher because I'm not, well, for one, a lot of people want to know the fancy stuff, the aerobatics, right? You see a lot of stuff on YouTube. And let's face it, for the most part, bass is, for most gigs that you'll do, it's keeping it very, very simple. And that's what the song needs, that's what the bass needs. And so people aren't really gravitating towards that. And so to me, there are so many fundamentals and subtleties that go into making us better bass players, better musicians, more aware. And I mean, just with, I don't know if you can see, but on the bass, just when I'm doing a recording session for somebody else, I will, there's no benefit to showing you on the bass, but
sure.
Where the fingers are placed on the plucking hand, there are so many variations of where you place it and how you hit it and approach it, and then using the tone control, using the variations of pickups. Mine's a very straightforward set, master volume, master tone. People ask me, why didn't you go with the two master volumes and the master tone? Well, for me, personally for live, I love the quick and easy reliability of returning to the same sound by a 3 pickup selector switch, and then using all the other variations that you can use with the tone control, with as I mentioned, the different ways you can pluck the bass. And I do, and the pick as well. I mean, gosh, it's like, it's too funny, because on some of my videos when I'm using the pick, you get the comment, real bass players don't use the pick. And I sometimes engage them, sometimes I just ignore them. I said, well, let's ask Paul McCartney and Carol Kay and all these great players that have used the pick. Ask them how they feel about the pick. To me, it is another option for sound changes. It's all about playing for the song. You'll hear that from me again and again. And it's the pick adds another dimension and choice of sounds. And it's not all about being aggressive. Phil Lynott, another great fretted player. I mean, there's so many of them. I know Chris Squire. There's so many of them. And Bobby Vega. So it goes on and on, right? And so it's, for me, and it's, again, there are different ways that you can use the pick. It doesn't always have to be the aggressive style. It can be a very light touch and more over the fingerboard. And so there are so many subtleties that I consider the fundamentals, and how you move your positioning and where you play on the fingerboard. I'm a big proponent of, to me, the money area is in of course, the low strings lower down, but in from the 5th to the 7th to the 9th fret, that's where you get the biggest sound. I'd rather play it higher up on the lower strings, because it gets a fatter sound. But then sometimes you need it punchy. So you modify it. And those subtleties are often the things that a light bulb goes off with somebody. I do a few one-on-one class teachings, but not so many, because people don't really think about this stuff. They want to know how to play a certain song or a certain style, which is usually very, let's say, flash. Most of the times that's not very useful in the real world. So a lot of my YouTube videos cover that stuff as well, where I'm of course, I like to just out and out play on the fretless. People love that too. And I love it. I jammed recently the Firm's Closer, and just bass alone. And here's the thing, I sometimes get comments that I do a version of Yes's Roundabout, and people tell me, you're playing that wrong. And I'm like, well, no, I'm playing my version of it.
Sure.
And I play things differently that I recorded 20 years ago, because songs evolve, right? I'm not playing it wrong. I'm playing it differently to how Chris Squire. If that's wrong, then fine. But hey, I modify my own songs. Am I playing it wrong then? Because I'm not playing it like the original. Here's the thing. With the Firm and Blue Murder, if we recorded a separate take after the one we did, it would be different again.
Absolutely.
And so people get, like James Jamerson, you hear some of those outtakes, they're completely different on the Motown stuff. So it's like, we get locked into one version, which is the version that everybody knows because that was released, but they probably played it differently every time. And so, I play it differently. Yes, I finger it differently to how Chris Squire did. Yes, I know I do. But I'm playing my interpretation of that. If that's wrong, then please forgive me, please, gods.
Well, and it is funny because there are the hot topics in the bass community where if it's a pick or more than 4 strings, which is another area that people get very upset and militant about, but it is always impressing how they feel emboldened to share their opinion, like somehow you have to change because they don't think that's not how they think you should do it. And it's kind of like, no, this is your voice. You play it how you want to play it. And it, you're absolutely right. The music evolves, the situation evolves. There's always some trial and error where you might go, I'm going to do this. And then you might go, I really liked it when I did that. So from here on out, I'm doing that.
Yeah. And, another great example is Led Zeppelin and Queen. I mean, they had to modify things because of all the different layers and different sounds. And also working with Jimmy closely like that, some of the songs we played for the first time, and that was the final version.
Yeah.
I mean, on the second album, All the King's Horses, that was the first time we played it together. We'd heard it, but then that was the first time that we played it. And so, the first time that you play it is probably going to evolve and change from the 40th time you play it down the road. Mm-hmm. You figure out, that could be better doing it that way. I mean, even on our very first outing, which was in Europe in 1984, before the album was even released with the firm, I could hear us playing and exploring things differently to how they were on the album, which hadn't even been released yet. So to me, it's healthy and natural that we should do that. And I know it gets into kind of funky territory when we're interpreting somebody else's thing, but that is how I feel it. And I want to play that opening riff of Roundabout. Chris Squire did it on the lower frets. Mm-hmm. To me, it feels very awkward, and it has a better flow to it. It flows a little better when you do it on the 5th and 7th fret on the lower strings. So that's how I choose to play it. And anyway, that's enough, isn't it?
There we go.
But yeah, things do evolve, and that's good. It's healthy.
For sure. And kind of coming back to the education, kind of related, but you've been involved with a lot of the rock and roll camps, the fantasy camps.
Yes.
So what is that like? I know it's an experience for people to have an opportunity to play with some of the iconic players in the world of rock. Do you get many bass people that want to play along and learn from you, or is it more singers and drummers and of the other sort?
It varies. It varies because it depends who the headliner is. But ultimately, I'm in charge. I'm one of their rock star counselors.
Yes.
They have some amazing people. I mean, in the bass department, this camp that I just did one down in Florida and it was Dave Mustaine was one of the headliners. Nico McBrain from Iron Maiden, and Steve Morse from Deep Purple, Dixie Dregs, all that. And so a lot of guitar players and quite a few drummers too, to be expected. And so, but I had a band, and sometimes I'm playing bass with my camp band. Sometimes I'm not. I was playing bass with my band this time. And a lot of that I did on fretted bass, because playing Megadeth stuff on a fretless bass, you can do it, but you have to really know the stuff inside and out. Mm-hmm. You have to own it. And so, anyway, to get back to the educational side, for me as a counselor, I am there somewhere between a producer, a cheerleader, if you like, a ringleader, and a mentor. It's like you are there to bring out the best of them in 4 days and encourage them. I mean, you're not there to beat them up and make them feel that, because, they're with the headlining guys for a relatively short amount of time. On this one, Steve Morse did play with all the camper bands on the evening as well, in the evening. And so they had more time, but essentially the one-on-one time they have with the headliners is comparatively short in the 4-day thing. Mm-hmm. As counselors, we're basically with the band the whole time, and we're getting them ready to play with these headliner guys. And some of that involves, I mean, for me, we all do master classes. So I give them the option of 2 masterclass subjects. One of them is coming up with the perfect bass line for your original song. I ended up not doing that because they gravitated more towards my other class, which was handling stage fright and everyday stress.
Oh, wow.
And it was every time I do that one, it's a great attempt. Because you may have seen through my stuff too, I love to meditate. That's part of my life. I've been meditating for over 30 years. And, I'm naturally, because of life circumstances, I was heavily bullied when I was a kid and, dealt with some major stress. And so I dealt with that in the 80s by drinking and partying to dull the pain of dealing with everyday people, dealing with fellow musicians and getting up on stage, right? You wouldn't think that looking at me, but yeah, I had to deal with a lot. And so partying was fun, but it was a coping mechanism.
Gotcha.
Right. And so by the time that was all done in the end of the 80s, early 90s, 1990, I was like, I've had enough of this. And so I just stopped it. I stopped it all and then realized that, wow, I'm having to relearn how to be a human being because all that stress and fear and anxiety that I've been suppressing all those years came back to the surface, front and center.
Wow.
Dealing with people, dealing with fellow musicians and getting back up on the stage was terrifying. And so there was a rebuilding process. And so, the meditation came along and different techniques that I've used to naturally deal with all that. And so it's become wonderful. And I share that stuff. I mean, in a class of people, and we're meditating together using yoga breathing techniques and all that, and how to handle it's many things. We've got a lot of stress on us as human beings, and especially these days with the uncertainties of the world, right? We've all got extra stress, and then stuff like for people who work at companies, public speaking, and yes, getting up on stage and overcoming stage fright and all that. People just want this so much. And so it's become a big part of I'm putting together a book, like a self-help book of that stuff. So watch this space for all that. And just people want it. And so, there's my education, it goes way, way beyond just the bass. It's which I love that because, as you work on yourself, as you work on your self-esteem, your calmness, your creativity, enhancing your creativity, I cover that as well. Then along with that, when you work on everything else, you become a better bass player. Just because of your awareness a lot of the time with the campers, their biggest problem is, and this happens with young players too often when they're learning, they're focusing so much on their instrument and their part that they forget that they are part of a band and they're part of a song. And so I do a lot of that where I'm getting them focused on the bigger picture. But anyway, when you focus, so music is not just about playing your instrument, it's about everything else. It's a whole life experience. And as musicians and creative people, I mentioned earlier, you have to be aware of the other 50%. These days, even more, because there's a lot of independent musicians and independent bands. We're handling a lot. We're handling social media. We're handling recording. We have to be our own producer and engineer. We have to know PR. We have to know marketing. We have to know legal stuff.
Yeah.
And then I won't call it network. I'll call it relationship building, how to maintain meaningful relationships with people that you meet. And so, I love to share all that stuff as well. It's a whole package, if you like. And it's my education, yes, and all the subtleties of the bass and all that, but so much more.
Very, very cool. And we should probably talk, because we've talked a little bit about your signature Fender bass, but your gear, how are you getting your sound? What are you playing on?
When I'm recording at home, everything is direct. And I'm a big believer in you get your sound from what you've got. A lot of the time I end up just using the DI. And I'm not using anything fancy. I'm recording into an iMac. I'm using PreSonus Studio One. Mm-hmm. And which I love that software. And I'm recording through a simple Focusrite interface.
Nice.
That's it. I don't use a compressor on the way in. I'm using everything so that it's just the perfect, pure, clean sound. It's easy to get away from that. You think, oh, I've got to, run through this preamp and all that. And there's nothing wrong with that. And add this effect and all that. And there's such a pureness of sound that comes from that. I create an amp track, a virtual one, because they got some killer amps, and these days on virtual stuff you can do so much. Mm-hmm. And I love doing that because you then can tweak it for the sound afterwards for the song. You're not locked into one thing. And so that's for the studio, and I only use my Fender signature basses or my original firm fretless or firm fretted bass. Mm-hmm. I don't even own a jazz bass. I don't own any other basses. It's all, I can do it all from there. If I need to do, occasionally I'm asked to do some low tuning stuff, so I'll just tune the bass down. Or if there are gigs, I have done gigs where that's required, I'll tune a bass, restring a bass with a low B, E, A, D as opposed to using the 5-string. I'm not a fan of the 5-string. Nothing against it, but it's I love the spacing and the sound of the pickups on a 4-string bass. Passive, it's just pure. And to me, the bass evolved. It was one of the wonderful things about a Fender bass is it evolved in the context of a band, right? And so you put a Fender bass in a band, it sits perfectly. It doesn't tread on anything else. It stays out of the way of the drums, the kick, the guitars, the voices. It has its perfect space. You hear a Fender bass by itself, it isn't necessarily the prettiest thing, especially a P bass. It's kind of honky. It's got can be clunky.
Sure.
A bass is really made to be played with a band. I mean, sure, I do solo stuff too. But, the problem is when you start adding active, it boosts frequencies, right? You add a low frequency and sounds amazing by itself, right? But you add it to a band, and especially in the recording session, it is starting to get in the way of the other instruments. And so for me, a Fender bass, and plus if you add those lower notes as well, you're doubling it, you're adding the active with the lower notes. It's starting to tread on other people's territory, like the low notes of a piano or a B3 organ or the drums. So nothing against it. There's so many ways you can express yourself, and you do have to follow your instincts of what you got, because your bass sound comes from your heart, comes your soul first. And whatever you're hearing, you should pursue that and use the tools at your command to create that, whatever it is. But do it as much as you can from the instrument in your hands first. Mm-hmm. And that is my approach with recording. Live, I've been using Fender gear. I love the Fender Rumble heads. Plus I use the Super Bassman, which is all tube. But the Fender Rumble, an 800-watt head. It's like 6 pounds, great for travel. Mm-hmm. Sounds amazing. It's got that classic tone. Has a DI out of it, and it's a lot of power. It's like I've never run out of power with that thing. So I don't really use any pedals. I don't like them. I don't use any compression live either. To me, it actually squashes a lot of the dynamics. I understand with certain styles like slap style and all that, it can help to bring out a lot of that. Mm-hmm. But I don't like to rely on any of that. If anything, I'll drive the front end, drive the tubes a little harder so you have a little natural compression with the tubes. But no effects. Occasionally, I'll use an old Digitech bass synth wah just for the octave on it.
Gotcha.
They don't make that pedal anymore. I don't know, I just love it. So occasionally I'll use a delay, but nothing much. It's only when I'm doing solo stuff, just to fill it out. Other than that, it's clean, straight in, no nonsense.
Nice. Well, and from what I'm capturing, a lot of your sound comes from your hands and yes, how you're positioning and everything you're doing with them. But the interface between your hands and the bass is your strings. Do you have a preference in strings?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I've been using DR Sunbeams for 25 plus years now.
Wow.
And I just love everything about them. I use them on my fretted and fretless. Originally, I was using the Rotor Sound swing bass strings back in the 80s. Love them. They have just such a great sound. All the firm Blue Murder stuff was on there. But they did chew up the fingerboard. Now, that is not the biggest priority for me, because if you're going to use rounds on a fretless, people say, well, it's going to chew up your fingerboard. Well, what's more important, the sound or the fingerboard? Mm-hmm. I can't get my sound out of flats. And so the sound is the most important thing for me. Sunbeams they are rounds, but they're a little bit more gentle for some reason. I think they're a round core, and the nickel plating or coating, whatever it is. I should know if I've been playing them for 25 years. But anyway, they don't chew up the fingerboard so much, but they still have that wonderful sound. And yes, every year or so I take some 000 grade steel wool, and I take out a little groove that's there. And I do it myself. Mm-hmm. Every 3 or so years, I'll probably have to have the neck shimmied down by a professional luthier. But, that's it. That's the compromise or the sacrifice, if you like. That's why I switched to ebony on my bass from the original firm fretless. And that's why I tried other basses, because I was trying to find that Fender sound in a bass that had ebony fingerboard. I had an ebony fingerboard. The Music Man I used for a while, a great bass, but I couldn't get my sound. I just could not get my sound out of it. You can't out of that, really. And then I played in the Blue Murder years a JD bass. They're from the UK, custom made. This one wasn't specially made for me. I found it in a music shop. And it sounded like a Fender to me. It's like, but it doesn't look like it. It looks more like an Alembic. But it had the ebony fingerboard. And so it's like, at that point. And then later, in the early 90s, I thought, well, why don't I just see if Fender will make a bass with the ebony fingerboard? It's like, duh, And they did, and that was it. That was the answer to my questions. And so I still use the firm fretless, but I had a very light epoxy coating put on it. You can probably see it on this bass. It has a shine to it.
It's got a luster, yes.
But that fingerboard, the rosewood, is virtually down to nothing. It's probably hard to see that. But that is held up with that very light epoxy. The guy who did it, my luthier, said, yeah, it might give you another couple of years. Well, that's 20 years later, and it's still going. I don't take it out so much anymore. And it's more for studio. I use it a lot in the studio, and it still has that warm, wonderful sound. The epoxy on it was thin enough. It didn't make it like glassy sound. So, but now I have the perfect bass that can do it all, and those DR strings are paramount to my sound. 25 years and counting, and I recommend anybody who's on the fretless, even if you're a flats player, to check them out. They're amazing.
Very nice, very nice. And as we look ahead, we're kind of hopefully coming more towards the end of the tunnel when it comes to the pandemic, but it has certainly affected many musicians' plans for the future. What projects, what are your thoughts? What's coming down the pike?
Yeah, I have a lot of pending things, and they really stuck their neck out. And for Rock Camp, I have another one coming up in March, but they were very strict with their COVID rules. Everyone had to be vaccinated ahead of time, and we had to have a negative PCR test, full PCR test beforehand, and anybody that tested positive was not allowed to go. Simple as that. Yeah. And I'm not going to go into all the people's preferences on all this. I support whatever feels right to people. I do have my opinions on it.
Sure.
Very strong ones, but I keep it to myself because it's a personal choice, right? It really is, and as it should be. We have to do what feels right to us, and also considering our lifestyle and work. For me as a touring musician, some situations have required that I do that. And so some people didn't make it to camp, and some people had to turn around because they didn't get their results until they were there. A poor couple of guys, they drove down from Detroit, Michigan to Fort Lauderdale.
Oh, wow.
And they had their test and they got the result when they arrived, and it was positive. So they had to turn around. And there was a COVID officer on site. We had to do an online questionnaire every day. We had to have a temperature taken. We wore masks a lot of the time. It wasn't mandatory, but it was encouraged. And so, there are people who just have to be smart with it. I do have another camp coming up, and I'm supposed to be, and I say, I never count my chickens before they hatch. I'm heading out to Florida again in a week's time to do a show with Lou Gramm. It is an outdoor show, and there are more shows booked for later in the year. And so, at this point, it's take it all a step at a time. I do have other pending things. And it's actually very, very exciting. But I don't want to put anything out there. I put out the Lou Gramm thing. I put out the camp. But, it's been just at this point until I'm on that stage, on that plane, whatever, it's all still pending. And so, I managed to keep very active and busy in 2020 and 21. So there were some in-person recording sessions. They didn't require the vaccine for that one up at East West Studios in LA with Mike Klink producing, and then another one with Ron Nevison producing, some pretty big sessions. And East West is very spread out as a studio. It has a huge room, huge history too. Frank Sinatra and all these different people that recorded there. So we had to do the health questionnaire and the temperature before each session, and we had to wear masks in the studio, and which was fine, it's okay. At least we're all working and all that. Did a couple of those, and then, but I've been very fortunate because I was actually doing the remote recording thing way before it became a thing. I started doing that in 2001, 2002. And so I was pretty well established with doing the home recording thing for sessions all throughout the world. It's amazing what technology has opened up.
Yeah.
And so I was very busy actually in 2020 with recording sessions, and very, very thankful for that. But I also got resourceful too. I mean, we're creative people. We have to be resourceful. I did this thing. I recorded a solo bass track called The Eternal Now. And I think we can play that one as well. And so it's like, okay, I did a tab and sign chart thing where it's the exact tablature, and it's a pretty complex tune. There's some innovative techniques in that as well that I haven't used it. I had to work out how to do them because it's like, how I want to hear that. How am I going to be able to pull that off? And so that was quite a track for me. And so I do this thing. It's a signed chart. I did a handwritten one, and then there are high-quality copies of it. I signed it and personalized it. So I did a bunch of those in 2020. I also did some signed pictures. And then recently I did this thing called Tony Franklin's Mojo-Infused Bass Strings, which I'm using my original JD and my original firm fretless. I also use my new signature model, the fretted bass. Of course, the JD and the firm fretless are the most popular. I play the songs that were recorded and performed on those. So I will play and record a video, a personalized video to whoever requested it, whatever song they requested. I'll play Radioactive for. I'll personalize it and then put on a brand new set of Sunbeams, and I will play that set. They'll get the set. They get the personalized video, which I send directly to them, and the personalized picture that's taken during that time with the bass. Sign that to them. It's a nice little package. You can go to fretlessmonster.com and look for it right on the front page. But, the point is, we get resourceful. How can we do something that's unique and different and that people might enjoy? And people have really enjoyed that. So, I do my Cameo greetings. I'm on there. It's all under Fretless Monster. Cameo.com/Fretless Monster. Lots of shameless plugs here. But that has been a wonderful way to reach people. Sometimes I do lessons on there. And my cameos get long as well. Sometimes I see some of the artists do a 30-second or a 2-minute one. Mine are 12, 15 minutes. And some of them are pretty intense, actually. They'll be for their brother who may be in hospice.
Oh, wow.
Big fan, or they want to hear some music, or somebody who's recovering from from cancer or something, and they want some encouragement and positivity. And so I take that stuff very, very seriously, and they gravitate towards me for it. And so, that's, as we get older and play more, we know it's also about giving back. And so Rock Camp is about that. There's so much more. And Dave Mustaine said it himself when they were doing a Q&A. He said, we come here and again, and it's not about the money. It's about coming in and making a difference, maybe shining my light and my experiences so that people may gain something from that, And so I've been very fortunate. I really have, because I have more ideas and stuff than I can handle in the day. And so it's like I have to be very disciplined, very focused and purposeful with my time, because I have a novel on the way. I have this the positivity book and all that, the lifestyle thing. I have a memoir on the way. I'm always writing songs, usually in the middle of the night. Just write them straight to paper. So I'm in the process of recording all those vocal songs, more kind of pop, rock, alternative stuff that I use for song placement and all that. And so there's that. I'm constantly writing songs and then recording sessions and other things and gigs and everything. So it's like always on the go creatively. I love it. I love having lots of things to do, lots of creative outlets. And so, it's just, I've got to live a long, healthy life to be able to do all these things. So I have been very busy during this time and have some wonderful things coming up, which I'll share when it's time.
Okay.
But, in the meantime, I just feel so fortunate. I really do.
Excellent. Well, it sounds like the pivotal point for us to keep our eyes on is fretlessmonster.com, because you're wide across all the social media stuff as well, usually with your name, either Tony Franklin, the Fretless Monster. If we focus on the fretlessmonster.com, they'll be able to stay on top of what's coming, stay up to date with what is on its way.
Yeah, that's the hub, but there's, everything is under Fretless Monster.
Right.
There's the Instagram /Fretless Monster, Twitter /Fretless Monster, even TikTok /Fretless Monster. And then the YouTube is Tony Franklin, the Fretless Monster. So if you go to Fretless Monster, you'll probably find pretty much everything. But yeah, it's all on the website. And we appreciate your support with all that, because, I maintain all my social media. I maintain my own website, all the posts. I love to interact, and people know that it's me. They can tell, because it's very personal, and I take time with it. To me, it's very important to have that real contact, and all that social media has been a source of income, of work, of meaningful connections. And so I love doing it all. I feel so fortunate. And, it's back 20 plus years ago, there was none of this. And so it's when I first cleaned up and there was no social media, there was no internet, no emails and all that. So I literally had to do the old school way of going around and meeting people and going to jams. It was terrifying. It was mortifying to me to have to do that stuff. But now everybody's right here, and it's wonderful. But anyways, people as well, look out for the Guitar Zoo stuff. Yes. Because that is a pleasant surprise. It's like discovering new music. Really, it is, with Carmine and myself, the spirit of Blue Murder with modern influences and this who's who of guitarists on there. So look for that too. It's very, very exciting. There's something like 30 songs on that. Oh, it's a whole bunch of stuff, and it's killer. It really, really is. So as well as everything else. I know I can barely keep up with myself, so have fun keeping up with me, everybody.
You are one busy guy, Tony. Well, we appreciate you taking time out of such a busy schedule to chat with us, to share your insights, your journey, your music, how you're getting your sound. So many details, and we definitely want to look forward to all the wonderful things that you have coming in the future. Folks, you've seen him here. Tony Franklin, the Fretless Monster on Bass Musician Magazine.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody, and thanks for the opportunity and the time to be able to share. Appreciate you all. Appreciate you all.
My pleasure.